Please walk.
Thank you for coming tonight. We have John Burke here. He's going to talk to us about the first Thanksgiving. He gave me a little bit something to read here, so I'm going to read it. And it says, today we have a special guest speaker, Medina County Treasurer John Burke, who is here to tell us the factual story of the first Thanksgiving between the Wampanoag Indians and the Pilgrims in 1621, Plymouth, Massachusetts. Treasurer Burke has been involved with Indian lore since he was in the Order of the Arrow as an Eagle Scout. He has made his clothing using the same materials as the Indians, duplicating authentic pieces from museums. His ancestry goes back to the first pioneers in Valley City, Ohio. There are two parts to our program. First, Yellow Feather of the Wampanoag tribe will speak to us about that first Thanksgiving celebration with the Pilgrims. In the second part, John Burke will step out of character and tell us more about the facts and myths regarding Thanksgiving in America and answer questions. So now let us prepare our minds to go back to a different era in the autumn of 1621, when the red and white races met to celebrate and give thanks. Let us hear the words of Yellow Feather.
Listen, brothers and sisters. I am Massasoit of the Wampanoag. You English call me Yellow Feather. Wampanoag means those who see the first light, because the Wampanoag live along the great water you call the Atlantic. We are further east than all the other tribes, and so we are the first in the morning to see the sunrise. I see many white men and women here. Are you those people they call the Puritans? I think not. You are not dressed like them. I remember when they came to our shores in their large wood canoes with tall tree trunks, 3 of them in their large canoe. And the clouds, white clouds, were filled with wind. They came from their canoe and stepped on our shore, and it was in the English year of 1620. They came and built our log lodges. For once there was a great Wampanoag village called Pawtucket. Yes, we had many villages back then. Only 4 winters before, we had 69 villages along the great water and up the bay and into the creeks and rivers. We had many in those villages, 75,000 Wampanoag. And then the English traders and fishermen came. They had visited us several times before these Puritans came. They brought with them many trade goods, colorful shirts, brass kettles, things made of copper, and good metal knives and hatchets, things we had never seen before. They also brought a drink they called beer, which is very good. We liked the beer. But they also brought a sickness that none of our healers could cure. And it soon killed many of our people. And those who lived, they had scars on their faces from which even the wolves backed away in fear. We had no cure from our healers. We lost some 2/3 of our Wampanoag people in a very short time. And even these Englishmen who came 4 winters before the Puritans, they were not the first white men we had seen. Long ago, in my father's time, there were the Italians and the French and the Spanish had all come and walked on our shores. Sometimes they enslaved some of our people. We know this because Tisquantum, the one the English call Squanto, he had been captured by the slavers and made his way to England. He spent 5 winters there before he came back to us on another large canoe with the white men. He had learned to speak the English language. These things taught us to be very cautious of these white Puritans who landed on our shore. So we did not go down and greet them. We stayed in the forest and we counted them as they came off the ship. We counted 131. But these were different. They had brought their women and children, their families. So we thought maybe they were peaceful. And yet we did not talk with them. And we watched them throughout the winter. They never saw us. We were like the shadows in the forest. And during that winter we watched as they did not know how to hunt or eat. And they had come too late in the year to plant their crops. And they died. And they buried many out in the winter in the shallow graves because the ground was so frozen. At the end of the winter, we counted them again. There was only 59 left. This is when I decided to send one of my men, Somerset. He was an Abenaki who had been visiting us. He could speak a little of the English language also. And I told him to go and talk to them. So he went there and he spent one night with these Puritans. And then he returned to our village and spoke to me about what he had learned. I thought these Puritans had come in peace and maybe I should not run them away or kill them. Maybe I should make an alliance with them. And they could, with their cannon they brought from the wood canoe, maybe they could help me fight my enemies, the Massachusetts to the north and the Narragansett to the south. This is what I called Squanto. He could speak better English than Somerset. And I said, go, make an arrangement for a meeting. And so he did this. And I joined with many of my warriors, and we went to this meeting. We brought beaver skins. This is what the white men we had seen before wanted the most. The beaver skins. So we brought beaver skins. And we knew they liked the dried herring. And we brought this for them as a present. We knew they desired such things. And I left my warriors on a hill overlooking their settlement. I had 20 warriors with me. And they sent one man. His name was Winslow. And we said he could stay as our prisoner while we met. And when we came back, we would return him. He gave me 2 very nice metal knives. I carried one in my knife sheath all the time. He also gave me a copper chain with a medallion and then jewels set in it. We laid down our bows and arrows before we went to meet with the white men. When I came into their settlement, they brought me into one of their log lodges, and I sat on a green rug. And then their chief, they called him Governor John Carver, he came in. Oh, they had drummers when they came in, and they had a trumpeter, and they made loud noises. They also had their talking sticks. They did not fire them, and they kept them against the wall. We did the traditional kiss of each other's hands, and then we sat down and talked. And throughout the day, we decided to make an alliance. We negotiated a peace with these Puritans. We agreed on several things. We said we would not do injury to each other. And if one was offended or an offense made, we would turn the offender over to the other for punishment. When we met, we were to leave our weapons in our village and not bring them. We also said that if something was stolen from a village or their settlement, we would return it. And we agreed to protect ourselves against our common enemies and in general promote peace with our neighbors. These are the things that we both agreed on. This alliance lasted for many years. I remember before I left, one of their captains, he was a great warrior, I found out. His name was Miles Standish. Oh, he gave me a nice copper kettle, and it was filled with peas. Oh, they were very good too. I decided that I would send Squanto in the spring. I told them we would come and help them plant their crops. They were not good hunters or fishermen. So we showed them how to hunt the deer and how to trap the small game. We showed them how to take and make a fishing spear so they could spear the fish in the rivers and the bay. And Squanto showed them how to plant corn. They had never seen corn before. And so we showed them how to make a mound in the ground. And then put a dead fish in each mound. And after 15 suns, when the fish is very smelly, then we poke a hole in the top of the mound and we put several kernels of corn in. And once the corn begins to grow, we put beans and squash, the three sister crops, to grow around it. They grow very well together. And by doing this, they soon had a good crop. And in the fall, they had a plentiful harvest. And then one day, we heard loud noises. I sent my scouts to investigate what they were. The men of the settlement were walking back and forth, and they took their talking sticks and were firing them into the sky. We thought maybe they were going to make war on us. I decided to send my warriors again, and our ambassador, Obadok. We took 90 of our warriors, and we were on the hill that overlooked the settlement. And Hobanok went down with Squanto, and he talked with their captain Bradford. He saw our warriors, and he said, "No, we are not making war. We are celebrating." They were celebrating their great harvest they had, and they were going to have a feast for 3 days, showing their thanks. They also had a ship, another canoe, come in with more white people and trade goods and supplies. So they asked us to join them in this 3-day feast. I thought this was a good idea, so I accepted. But do you know, these Puritans, they still were not good fishermen or hunters. They had gone off to try to find some ducks and geese. So I sent 5 of my hunters out, and they each came back with a large, nice, fat deer, so we could have good venison at this feast. Oh, they had much food that day. They had our venison. They had some ducks and geese. They had the corn from the harvest, and pumpkin, and squash, and cabbage, leeks, cucumbers, lettuce, parsnips. From the ocean and lakes, we showed them how to take the clams and the mussels, cod and bass and lobster. And then they took our corn and they made the cornmeal bread. And we brought our special maple sugar and put it on it. Oh, it was a good feast. These days of feasting and celebration, we opened our hearts and our arms to the settlers. We became like brothers. And this peaceful alliance lasted for many years. This is my memory of that meeting and Thanksgiving feast that the Puritans invited us to. Now, let me step out of the character of Massasoit. We'll continue our discussion about Thanksgiving, and I'll take some questions at the end. So, what you just heard was the Native American version of that Thanksgiving in the fall of 1621 with the Wampanoag Indians. That's from their oral history. So that gives us a little different story than what we heard in school. You remember what you learned in grade school. It was about the Pilgrims and in 1621. And that whole story actually came from, the only written document we have about that day is a letter written by Winslow, the man who was held in that first meeting as a prisoner until Massasoit came back from meeting with Carter. He was, Edward Winslow was the secretary to Captain Bradford. And he wrote about that first Thanksgiving, and there's just 2 paragraphs he wrote in a letter that he sent the next year in 1622 back to England. Well, that letter ends up in a pamphlet the next year. It's printed without his permission, but it's printed in this pamphlet called Mort's Relations. And it doesn't say a lot. Really, all it says is that it mentions the Puritans exercising their arms, which they were celebrating this Thanksgiving Day, so they're marching around, and they're firing their talking sticks, as the Indians say, but they're firing their matchlock guns. And that's what arouses Massasoit and his warriors. So they come, and Winslow talks about Chief Massasoit coming, and they're concerned about the guns being fired, and they meet with Bradford, and Bradford tells them, no, they're not going to make war on them. But in Winslow's letter, he just says the Indians came, and they told him they were celebrating Thanksgiving, and they invited him to Thanksgiving. He also mentions in the letter that they did bring some deer, and they had a feast. And that's it. That's all we know. There's no more detail than that in those 2 paragraphs. So where does this story that we heard in grade school come from? Well, that, after it gets printed in the pamphlet, Mort's Relations, it's lost. No one sees it, no one reads it, until 221 years later. And it's in 1841, and Alexander Young finds that, and they also have found Bradford's journal. And he takes those 2 sources, and he writes this book called The Chronicles of the Pilgrim Fathers. And that is also the first time that we hear the word pilgrim. In my presentation here, I was talking about the Puritans. Well, they were Puritans, a religious sect. No one called them pilgrims until Alexander Young coined that phrase and put it in his book. And that's where a lot of this story builds upon, is his book. So, what do we know about Puritans? We know they're a religious sect, a very conservative religious sect. They were in England, and they thought the Bible, not the church, presented or represented the Christianity faith in the purest form. So they believed in the individual congregation having control and being able to conduct worship. So they didn't agree to have this hierarchy like in the Roman Catholic Church, or even the Church of England, with a bishop and everybody else who told them what to do. So they were conservative in that sense, and they were also separatists. And by that I mean they didn't agree with the Seditious Act of Uniformity, which was passed in like 1593, quite a few years before. But that made it illegal to attend any religious worship service except in the Church of England. And so they didn't agree with that. And that's why they sought religious freedom. So they didn't go right from England to America. They actually had gone to Holland. Before they started on their trip in 1620, they'd been in Holland in an international city of Leiden for 12 years. So why did they decide to go to America? Well, and back in England, by the way, right at the time they decided to go to America, this is when the Civil War starts with Oliver Cromwell against King James. And at that point, King James is prosecuting anybody who will not be in the Church of England or in the church only. To the point of he imprisons them, he executes them, and so the Puritans don't want to go back to England. But they're kind of at a point of a decision they have to make, because now Holland, the Dutch, have said, well, you can stay here and you can practice your religion, but you have to become Dutch citizens. You have to give up your English citizenship. And they didn't want to do that. So they say, well, we can't go back to England. We'll be prosecuted there by the king. So let's go to America. So they decide that that's where they're going to go, and they're thinking actually establishing a new world, the kingdom of God, and use their rules of the saints, their orthodox rules of their faith. Well, they couldn't finance a ship. It was too costly. So they found this group of investors that would help them go. And they're called the Merchant Adventurers. And they had purchased a patent from King James, from the Plymouth colony, to settle another settlement north of Jamestown, Virginia, which had been settled in 1610, so 10 years before. So that's where they were going to go. Now, how would they pay for their way? They were going to be indentured servants. So they signed up to work for the Merchant Adventurers Company, and every week, all that they made, profits from 4 days would go to the company. And then they had 3 days, they could keep the profits made from those 3 days. But of course, one was their Sabbath, so they didn't work on one of those days. But that was the agreement. And so they would plant crops, but the main thing that was sent back to England from America at this point was cod, fish, dried herring, and furs, beaver furs for hats. And the other thing that was very rare that they found in American abundance was sassafras roots. And you ask, what was that used for? Actually, that was the one cure they knew would cure syphilis. And that was a rampant disease over in Europe. So these are the products that they would send back. So they leave on their voyage. We have a picture here. Oh, by the way, the indentured servants, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. I brought this here. You can come and look at this. But this is an actual indentured service agreement made in 1710 by the King of England. And his seal is on here, and then his signature is on the back that you can't see, but this is on the front of it. So you can take a look at that. So they are going to be indentured servants on a ship. You've all seen the picture of the Mayflower, and we'll explain that a little bit. So at the very last minute, the company, the Merchant Adventurers, tell them, well, we're going to bring some other people along with you. And these people they called, they weren't of the same faith. So they were the strangers. That's what the Puritans called them. They were the strangers. And they were full bondsmen. So they had to work 7 days a week, every week, every year, for the company to earn their way over. And then they wanted to change the Puritans' contract to be that. The Puritans said, no, we're not going to do that. We'll work part of the time for you as an indentured service, but not 7 days a week. So they sell their belongings, a lot of them, and they get enough money and they buy this little ship. The ship's only 50 feet long, and it's called the Speedwell. And that's where they go from England back to, or they go from Holland back to England, and they land at Southampton. And there, they meet up with the Merchant Adventurer's other ship, which is the Mayflower. That's 100 feet long, and that's been to America. And it's a regular ship that goes back and forth between Europe, actually France, and England. So, August 5th, 1620, 35 pilgrims, or Puritans, and 67 of the strangers, the other people, they go on the Mayflower. And then 31 of the Puritans go on the Speedwell, and they both take off for America. They get 75 miles out, and the Speedwell gets a leak. They have to come back. 2 weeks repair, they take off again. 50 miles out, the Speedwell gets another leak. Come back in, this one they can't repair. And by the way, they just found out, not just a few years ago, some historians dug this out, but those leaks were sabotage. The captain and the crew didn't want to go to America, so they were drilling holes in the boat. So they've got all these people, they cram 133 people on the Mayflower. So let's picture this Mayflower is 100 feet long. So I don't know how long this room is, but it's probably not much longer, the ship, than this. And it's 24 feet wide. So I bet you that's about the width of this room. And that's what they put 133 people on. So there's 3 decks on this. So your top deck is where the captain is and the crew. But does he have a wheel? No. They have a rudder back on these things. And the rudder isn't up here. The rudder is in the second level, which is where the kitchen is and the crew lives. And that's where the pilot is. And he's handling the rudder, talking through a hole in the deck to the captain up top. Okay? So all the passengers, 80 or a few over 80 people are down the very whole ship. That's 80 feet long and 20 feet wide and 5.5 feet tall. I'm 6 foot, so this is where all the people live while they go across the ocean. There are 102 passengers on that lower level. Now, the Mayflower has been taking trade goods back and forth from England and France for like 11 years, and it's known as a sweet ship. Why? Because it takes woolens from England to France, but when it gets to France, it ships back casks of wine. And the wine leaks sometimes into the boat, and so all the wood has this sweet wine smell. And actually, that's pretty good because it covers up some of the odors. It's a lot of ship with 102 people living down there in the hole. So they go across the ocean, and of course, what do they eat? They're eating mainly dried meat, dried foods, dried vegetables, cereal grains. They've got cracker and cheese and pudding. They have a lot of beer because the beer is more potable than water. So, but they didn't really plan on all these people. So they're eating up their supplies really, really quickly. And it's a tough go. They run into 2 storms. They only are able to go about 2 miles an hour. And it takes them 66 days to go 3,000 miles. Now, the storms throw them off. So when they come, they're supposed to be a little north of Jamestown in Virginia. But they end up clear up in Cape Cod. And they know that's not where they're supposed to be. So they go ashore up there December 8th, and that's their first encounter with some Indians. They go there, they stay overnight on the shore. They're looking to see if this is a place where they may spend winter. But the Indians come, and they don't even see them or talk to them. All of a sudden, all these arrows are shooting in on them. No one is hurt, but they fire their matchlocks back, and that scares the Indians off, and they go back into the ship. And they turn south, and they try to make it down closer to Virginia. Another storm blows them back. So 3 days later, December 11th, they end up in the harbor of where Plymouth is, Plymouth Bay. And they go on shore and they decide, well, this looks like a good place. We got a nice bay where our ship can stay. It's sheltered. Looks like we have rivers and streams. And they decide that's what they'll do, is stay there for the winter. Now, there's another thing, we always, have any been to Plymouth and saw Plymouth Rock? Yeah. And that's pretty good size, it's not like that. It's only about a third of the size of the original ones. But was that the original rock we stepped on when we got off Mayflower? I don't think so, because that story didn't come about until 1741, 100 years afterwards. And that was this guy named Thomas Ponce. He was 94 years old, and he said, my father was an original settler. And he told me that granite rock right there was the one they stepped on, and that's where the whole story of Plymouth Rock comes from. So when the Revolutionary War starts, about 20 years later, they decided to use this to hype up the revolution. So they're going to move it. Well, they crack it in two, and then people take little chips of it, and it all fits into the Revolutionary War psyche. And that's how that story got started, though. So we're not really sure that anybody said that probably it came off of the Mayflower. But anyways, they go on shore. They decide to build log homes there. It's too late to plant crops. So they get 7 homes built. Not enough for the people, so some live on land that winter and some live on the boat, which is pretty cold. The other thing they do, though, is at this point, the strangers, the non-Puritan group, they say, well, we didn't land in Virginia, so this contract that we have is void. That doesn't apply up here, only in the colony. So we're free and clear, and we're going to do our own thing. Well, they realize real quick that if they're going to survive the winter, they all have to work together. And that's why they come up with the Mayflower contract or compact. And that's what they all agree to do, is that they will, and it's written, signed by all the men, they're going to have this agreement that they'll abide by the will of the majority of the people. So they're going to be obviously a democracy. They're going to vote on anything important. They're also going to vote for the person they're going to name as their governor of the colony. And they're going to vote on who's going to be the preacher. So they're all going to agree on this. And that is the Mayflower Compact. So that's the first democratic agreement written in the United States. 41 men sign it, because women have no vote. Men own everything. And so that sets up a standard that lasts for 300 years. In 1920, when suffrage comes and women can finally vote. But it was set up that way, clear back then. And they elect John Carter to be the first governor. So the first week they're there, they do see an Indian, and he's with a dog, but they just see him in the woods, and that's it. And they never see another Indian all winter. And the other thing is they realize they're on top of an old Indian village, because there's all these burials, and there's still bones and skulls even on top. This Patuxent was the capital of the whole Wampanoag Confederation. So this was a large village, and we don't know exactly what it was, but it was either bubonic plague or a smallpox, and maybe both, that pretty much wiped out 2/3 of that 75,000 Wampanoag in about 4 years. And so they come here, and they notice an old Indian village, and they decide, well, that's God's will. He cleared the Indians for us, so this is where we're supposed to be. And so they build their homes right on top of this burial mound as the Indians watch them. The first month, they are really bad hunters and fishermen, like Massasoit said. The first month, they catch one fish and no game at all. And they use up all their supplies. So they actually find that in the burial mounds, there are caches of dried food, which they put with the dead. And they dig those up, and that's what they survive on in part of the winter. So in the spring, when the weather gets better, they are really surprised when Massasoit, the first Indian, comes down that they really see, and he walks right into the settlement, and he goes right up to the people there, and he says, "Hello, English." I mean, he can speak English really well. He's spent 5 years over in England. He said, "Hello, English. My name is Somerset. I am a Wampanoag. Do you have beer?" Well, first thing he asked for is beer, because he knows they have beer on the ship. They don't give him any by the Journal of Bradford. They gave him some cheese and some food and gave him a robe to wear because it was still cool in the spring of the year. But as I said in my presentation, so Somerset arranges the meeting between Massasoit and the Pilgrims. And they do have this alliance that they make out, which actually gets tested. It gets tested the very first year. Massasoit and Squanto are both captured by the Nagasat tribe, and they're prisoners. And so Captain Bradford takes a group of his men with matchlock guns, and they go to that village and they attack it. In the meantime, Massasoit and Squanto have escaped, but they don't know that. But they attack the village, and they get the chief there to also sign on for peace and not fight the Wampanoag. The other thing that happens is this young boy from the settlement, John Billington, who does live and survive, he's captured by another tribe, the Nauset. And Massasoit goes and he takes one of his 2 knives that he was given by Bradford at that first meeting, and Carver, and he gives that to the chief and arranges for John Billington to get released. And so that alliance is tested right away, and it proves to be a good alliance actually for 40 years. It's one of the few treaties with the Indians that lasted so long. So that first Thanksgiving, I told you a little bit about it. They had a good harvest and everything. It's kind of interesting that second ship that comes that fall in 1621. And so that brings 40 new settlers and supplies. So they're giving thanks for not only the harvest, but the fact that they got a rescue ship that came. And appropriately, the name of the ship is the Fortune. But it's not so fortunate, because on its way back, because now they've traded with the Indians and they've got beaver skins and they've got sassafras root and all the things that they're supposed to ship back to England. Well, it gets captured by a French warship. And so they lose all those supplies and never make it to England. They go to France instead. And the Indians, being invited to this Thanksgiving, they can relate to this because it's very similar to their corn feast, which is their harvest feast. In fact, the Indians have 6 different harvests. They have a maple sugar harvest, planting harvest in the spring, strawberry harvest around June time, the green corn harvest, the fall harvest, and the midwinter ceremony. So they have like 6 different ceremonies. There's a second Thanksgiving celebration that's actually 2 years after 1621. And that is because 2 more ships come and 2 more settlers. And it's also the end of a year drought they had. So they again have a Thanksgiving feast. And we assume the Wampanoag were invited to that too, but we don't know that from the records. But they also do a preemptive strike against the Massachusetts, who are the northern tribe that are enemies of the Wampanoag. And they kill the 2 chiefs there, and they stop them from harassing the Wampanoags. And they don't attack the English settlement either. So by 1629, the Plymouth colony has 300 people in it. And 1 year later, a flotilla of ships come from England, and they bring 700 people to us. So now it is a big settlement. And within 10 years, it's 20,000 people. And in those 10 years, another 80,000 come to America, to Jamestown and other settlements. So you can see how quickly the whites arrive, and this gives the Indians, cause for concern. Actually, in 1637, that's another Thanksgiving that was declared. That was actually after, it was a celebration for a battle they had against the Burke tribe, another enemy of the Wampanoag. And I didn't bring my picture, but I have one. It's a wood print, but it has a circle of soldiers and a circle of Wampanoag, and then it has this village of the Burke tribe. And it shows them attacking it. So they attacked this tribe with Dutch mercenaries and Englishmen, and they actually killed 700 men, women, and children of that tribe. And they take the chief, behead him, and take his head back and stick it up in the colony, and it's there for like 24 years. Yeah. So what happened to some of these people? So Captain Bradford, Governor Carter actually dies 1 year after the first Thanksgiving. He dies rather quickly. And so when he dies, they elect Bradford to be their governor. And he's governor for 31 years there. And he dies at age 68 in 1657. Squanto, he dies really soon after also the first Thanksgiving. He dies in 1622, a year later. We don't know what he died from. He had a disease. Again, we think it was probably smallpox or bubonic plague. But the other interesting thing is that he was also being held for execution by Massasoit, the chief. Massasoit found that he was plotting against him with an enemy tribe. And so he made him a prisoner, and he died while he was a prisoner. So Massasoit is the one that lives the longest. He's 90 years old when he passes away in 1661. And so his peace with the Puritans has lasted for 40 years. Now when he dies, his younger son, Metacom, he becomes chief. And he doesn't have the same feelings towards the English that his father does. And so he ends up starting a war against the English. And we know him as King Philip. So you've heard of the King Philip War that started in 1675. And they literally went and destroyed 12 different settlements of the English. And there were a lot of people killed during that war. They finally attack him, kill him, and they also behead him and take his head back to Plymouth and stick it up for 2 decades. The other thing we know that I should mention, I think I brought it here, yeah. Wampanoag, the other thing we get from the Wampanoag is wampum, the word wampum. And this is wampum, okay? So it comes from clamshells. But your normal clamshells are like this. You've seen these, white with a little purple trim. But these are quahaw clamshells. And these are the ones that are in Plymouth Bay and along the eastern seaboard. This is what the Indians really wanted. And wampum was used all over the country. We find wampum pieces like this in burial mounds, clear out to Rocky Mountains. So we know they were trading wampum. Was it a money? What was it, like money? We think of it as money, Not when the Indians did it, because think about this. So you got to break that up into little squares, okay, and they're all rough and ragged. Then you got to drill a hole in each one. You put on a long string or sinew, like their string from the back, near the backbone of the deer. And then you rub it over a granite rock, something really hard. And you just keep going back and forth until it rounds those jagged edges and it becomes tubular with a hole in it. Then you can stitch it into patterns like this. And so this could be a choker, it could be a leg tie, leggings. The Indians never had any writing until the Cherokees started a written language in 1836. So they had no written language, they had no books or records, but they did have wampum belts. So you hear them, for example, during war, taking around the war belt. That was a wampum belt. And what they would do is every person that signed up for war with another enemy, they would put the symbol of their tribe into a belt. And the belt would have what the treaty was when the war ended. It would have it in symbols in the belt. So when you see these in the museums, that's what usually is a record of something that they want to keep, and you put it in the wampum. Well, it took so long to make these things. The wampum belt, these were really important gifts. This is an adoption bracelet, so that's on the small purple. But these were given as special gifts. How did it become money? Well, the colonists, when they came, learned of wampum, knew how much the Indians cherished them, so they knew what the Quahog clamshells were. They set up 3 factories and they started mass producing it. And that's when it went to all the trading posts, and that's when it became like money. It also devalued, because there was so much of it now, the use of the wampum. So one thing I found out last Saturday, I just went down to Cincinnati and I did this program for their Mayflower colony. Wow. How many of you have heard about the Mayflower colonies? Not too many. The Mayflower colonies are all over the country, and they are the descendants of those 59 pilgrims that made it through the first winter. And they have this celebration during the month of November. I've done their colony in Cincinnati and Cleveland and Columbus, and they have them all over the country because, you won't believe this, 10 million people in the United States are descendants from those 15. 10 million. And about 100,000 are active in these colonies. So they get together and they have it's fun, they have a turkey and a pumpkin dinner, and there's no record of us ever having turkey at this first Thanksgiving. And that came out also, I'll tell you that in a minute, but that's another thing that was all made up. Well, I'll tell you two now. Where's the turkey come from, the pumpkin pie and all that? Well, this Sarah Hale was a person in 1836 that decided we should have one day as our holiday, observation, and observe the Thanksgiving for the whole nation. And she's the one, she was also an editor of a women's magazine. And so it took her till 1863, she finally convinced Abraham Lincoln to make it a national holiday, the 4th Thursday of November. And with that, she puts it in her magazine, and then she has all these recipes that you can use for this day of Thanksgiving. And that's where the pumpkin pie and all the recipes we have started there. But anyways, back to the colonies. So you have 10 million people that are descendants of this. And then when you start looking at who they are, it's pretty amazing. 9 U.S. presidents were descendants of those 59 people. Adams, Taylor, Grant, Garfield, Coolidge, Roosevelt, both Bushes. And Barack Obama almost was. And the reason why I say almost is because his ancestor was on the Speedwell that got sent back to port, and he didn't make it on the Mayflower, or he would have been a descendant too. So then you go through, just famous people like Alan Shepard, the astronaut. We've got a whole slew of generals, beginning like in the Civil War with General George McClellan. Eastman Kodak was a descendant, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Ernest Hemingway, Julia Child. And then you go into the actors. I swear like half of Hollywood is just at least they say they are. But, you got Clint Eastwood and Marilyn Monroe, and Richard Gere, and Matt Damon, and Hepburn, and the list just goes on. Jodie Foster, Alex Baldwin, Dick Van Dyke, Humphrey Bogart, Meryl Streep, Jane Fonda, and even Taylor Swift. So, it's just amazing the number of people that came from these 59 pilgrims. So was it the first Thanksgiving? No. No, it was just the first one that was written about by Alexander Young in 1841. The first one we know from records was in 1541. Wow. 100 years earlier. The Spanish conquistador Coronado, he was coming up through the Texas Panhandle, and he had a Thanksgiving with the Indians in the Palo Duro Canyon. And then, not too much later, about 20 years, 1564, the French Huguenots are in Jacksonville, Florida, and they have a Thanksgiving with the Indians there. Unfortunately, a year later, their whole settlement's destroyed by them. 1565, the next year, we've got another Spanish conquistador, Menendez de Avil, and he invites the Temuca tribe down in St. Augustine, Florida, to Thanksgiving. 1607, we've got the English Captain Popham, and he has the Abenaki up in Maine to the Thanksgiving feast. And, we mentioned Jamestown. In 1610, when they settled there, they had a Thanksgiving where they had the Indians, the Powhatans, there. So it wasn't the first Thanksgiving. It's just the first one that we call it the first Thanksgiving. That's our story from grade school. First official day. Now we talked about Abe Lincoln making it the fourth Thursday in 1863. But before that, actually, George Washington created a day of Thanksgiving, National Day of Thanksgiving, when he was a general in 1777, when they took Fort Saratoga after that. And then when he was president in 1789, we signed the Constitution of the United States, and to celebrate that, he decides that every year we should celebrate that on November 26th. So he does that. John Adams, the next president, does it. Then we have Jefferson. He does the same observation. But then comes along the War of 1812. And so when Madison, the war ends in 1815, he declares another day for the end of the war. And after that, it gets all kind of all over the place. Every state creates their own Thanksgiving Day for whatever reason. So it's mixed all over the country until Sarah Joseph Hale, actually, after 30 years, gets Abraham Lincoln to make it the fourth Thursday. And it's interesting too, while she's doing this, trying to get this national holiday, this is when Alexander Young, in 1849, comes out with his book about the Pilgrims. So that all pushes this to that end where it's the fourth Thursday. But it was changed in 1939. Who was the president in 1939?
Roosevelt.
That's right. Why do you think he changed it? He's in the middle of a depression. He changes it so people can start buying their Christmas presents a week early. He does it for the economy. And he changes it. But he doesn't get Congress to vote on it. So it's only legal and followed in Washington, D.C. And all the states still do their own thing. Congress is all mad at them, and they call it, that's Franklin's Giving Day. And so 2 years later, in 1941, they said, we're going to settle it. We're going to make it the last Thursday of November. And then instead of the third Thursday like he wanted, they made it the last Thursday. And we still have that today. So what are some of the traditions that we have? Football, right? So what was the first NFL game on Thanksgiving Day? Anybody know? What year and what were the teams? 1934. It was the Detroit Lions and the Chicago Bears. Now let's go back a little further. What was the first collegiate game on Thanksgiving Day?
Yale and Princeton.
You got it. It was Yale and Princeton. Yeah. In 1876. And by 1890, it was such a popular college game on Thanksgiving. They had attendance of 40,000 people in 1890. Yeah. Macy Day's Parade. When did that start? 1924. And who was the first president to pardon the first turkey at the White House?
Coolidge.
That's a pretty good guess. It was actually Harry Truman. Yeah. Yeah. And then nobody does it. Presidents don't follow until George Bush, first one, comes, and he pardons the turkey. And then everyone since then has pardoned the turkey. I'm not sure where they go, a turkey retirement fund or something. Maybe they get Social Security. I don't know. But anyways, that's where that started. Now, the Native Americans had an interesting thing too, though. So in 1970, they started a national day of mourning for the Native Americans. And what they do, and they still do it, there'll be Native Americans that go to Plymouth Settlement, and they go up right on that bridge where Massasoit was with his warriors overlooking the colony. And they go there for a day of mourning because they think this represents part of the beginning and the end of many of the native tribes. So they actually do that every year. So we do eat turkey on Thanksgiving. What's the percentage of people you think eat turkey on Thanksgiving?
98%.
That's a real good guess because it's 90. It's 90% of the American population has turkey on Thanksgiving Day. Yeah. So the other thing I brought with me is a Native American turkey call. So do I have any hunters here? Okay. So do you hunt turkey?
I killed the first wild turkey in the Diamond County.
You're not kidding.
When they opened up the season?
Yeah, when was that?
1989, 90?
And be about right.
Yeah, my boy, he was born in what, 80?
Yeah, because we couldn't hunt turkey when I grew up.
Yeah, I killed it down my city.
Wow. And now they're all over. They know what hunts.
Well, I grew up in southern Ohio, Jackson County, so Vinton County is where they reintroduced the wild turkey
Really?
to the state of Ohio back in the 60s because they were completely wiped out.
So what do you hunt them shotgun? Yeah. So your collar, if you have a collar, is it a horn? Yeah. You got a horn with a piece of slate, and you got a wood piece that you scratch it.
Slate cold. I get diaphragms, but I can, like I said, I can do it with my own voice.
Yeah, you did a good job too. Yeah. So have you tried one of these? So this is made from the turkey's wing bone. And they would glue and tie this together. So this is the sinew off the back of the deer, like tendon type of material. And then they would make a glue kind of out of pitch pine, and they would wrap it and put this glue on it, and they would make a turkey collar. So if you blow on it, you don't get anything. It's not like a whistle, but if you suck on it, it sounds like a turkey. So tell me if it sounds like a turkey. So when you eat your turkey, you can think about how the Indians used to have a turkey call.
Or when did the wishbone wrestling become a thing on Thanksgiving?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Does anybody know that? How the wishbone, you
Yeah.
take it, you dry it out, and
Yeah.
make a wish. I don't know. I always did that when I was a kid too.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to Google that and find out. Add that to my program.
We always did it, and whoever lost had to do the dishes, so that was everything.
It wasn't very lucky.
So, do you have any questions?
I had a question about the contract. How long were they like servants?
Well, we know from the Puritans, they were signed up for 7 years
Okay.
to be 4 days a week giving the profits to the company. Those other strangers, they were, I don't know if they had a time limit. They were full 7 days a week. They had to work like bondsmen, not
Okay.
slaves. But a lot of people couldn't afford to buy a ship and come over, so that's how they got their way over to the passage over to America.
In Medina County, in Brunswick, they would take young men and they would make them indentured to like blacksmiths and do different things, so wagon wheels and that. If you read some of the old newspapers, they'll talk about it. You can go to Medina Library, you can go back and look at the old newspapers from the Gazette and from the Sentinel, and they talk about them being indentured, and they were usually for 5 to 7 years.
So it's
I
like
got a question though, when you said 66 days to come over here from England,
Yeah.
and most of them were probably farmers,
Yeah.
why would they come in the fall?
Well, they got delayed a little bit, but yeah, they didn't start out till August. But now if they're going to try to plan, I agree with you, they should have come a lot earlier than that. But who knows what their finances were? You know what I mean? At first, the first tribe, they bought the speedwell, and then that didn't work out. All that caused delay. They were going to go in the spring, but they took off, mid-August. That's kind of late. But the other thing is, when the boat came back, when the Mayflower came back, it only took a month. It took half the time. They were going against prevailing winds, and so that took longer. But that was unfortunate. They ended up here right at the beginning of winter. And if they landed near Jamestown, they probably would have gone there, and they wouldn't have got so many people die. So.
You know
This is
how
another map I'll show you. You can come up and look at this later. This shows the Wampanoag and all those tribes in Massachusetts, the Narragansett, all the tribes that were up here that joined in the Confederation. All these tribes joined together in that King Philip War. But you can kind of see where the different tribes were back in 17.
Were you a Cherokee?
Pardon?
Were you part of the Cherokee?
No, the Cherokee were down in Kentucky.
South Carolina.
But they weren't
they're down in South Carolina.
But they weren't Iroquois either.
Pardon?
Were they
No. The Iroquois are up in New York and they're around the Finger Lakes. And six tribes belong to that. They actually swept through Ohio, the Iroquois Nation did. They were the first democratic council of Indian tribes. And they could bring 2,000 warriors together in a matter of a few days. And so no one wanted to fight the Iroquois. They were a big, powerful nation. They actually swept through Ohio during the Beaver Wars in 1648. Finally got stopped by the Miami down by Cincinnati area. And then they were driven back to the Finger Lakes. And for 100 years, Ohio is a no man's land. I mean, it's great hunting, but no tribe claims it. All the tribes come through and hunt. But they don't. The other interesting thing about the Iroquois and the Beaver Wars is, so when the French came on to Lake Erie in 1605, they found the Erie Indians, the lake's named after, on the south side where we are. In fact, I live on Nichols Road. Right down from me was an Erie fortress. And the Erie built forts, but they kept their poles in the ground, but their timber in the ground, they separated so they could shoot their bow and arrows out. But it was still a refuge for the people to come unattacked. So the Erie were on the south side and the Huron were on the north. And the Iroquois, they called beavers because they didn't have any beaver left. They trapped them all and traded them all, and so the Iroquois were always friends with the English through all the wars. And it's because the English gave them guns. They gave them guns so they could go over and attack the Huron on the other side of their beaver. And they wiped out 20,000 Huron in about a year. And the two groups that escaped, one went up to Green Bay. They come back 100 years later and they settle in the Sandusky area in 1740. And they are known as the Wyandots. That's where you hear Wyandotte County into the Wyandots, that's the Hurons. And then the other group came around to the south and the Erie took them in, and because of that, the Iroquois decided they're going to declare war on the Erie. The Erie are about 10,000, but they're really good warriors, and you have these forts all over. So they decide to challenge them to a lacrosse game. So the winner's going to take Ohio. And so the Erie accept, and they send their best warriors and families up to the Finger Lakes, and they start this multiple-day lacrosse game. And these are brutal games. I mean, you know, you have a lacrosse ball made out of leather. I have another lecture I do, and I talk about this. And then you have your stick. And you gotta take that, not handle it with your hands, you gotta get that into a hoop about this big around a 20-foot pole. Each end of the game area. But I mean, there could be 100 men on the field at the same time. And there's no other rules, so you got these guys beating each other with these sticks, and some people die on the field. But the games are like, you know, Ohio State and Michigan. It's just like, you bet everything, and it's the big game. Well, here they're the game, and the winner is Ohio, the Ohio country. Into the games for a couple of days, and then all of a sudden, one game, all the men drop their sticks and they run into the woods, and their women are there with their weapons. They come back out and they kill all the best players and warriors of the Erie nation, and the women and children. And that's when they swipe through Ohio and they kill the rest of the Erie Indians. I don't know that there's any blood lined up. And get stopped by the Miami, come back, and that's, like I said, when Ohio then becomes this great hunting area, everybody goes in there and no one claims it as their own. And consequently in our county here, we have lots of the eastern displaced tribes come through, the Delaware, the one Shawnee a little further south, but you got the Mingo, and they're an offshoot of Seneca of the Iroquois Nation. You just have all these tribes that come through this area during that 100-year period. So.
You talk about the beaver, and maybe I should read the book that I have at home that I bought for a kid. But the book is about this high, it must be this thick, and it's all about the part that beaver played in settling the Americas here. And then you bring up, now I'm going to have to
you should read it. I wonder which book it is.
It's called Beaverland.
Oh, Beaverland, okay. Yeah, read it, because the beaver industry affected our country big time for hundreds of years, until about 1830, 1840, when the beaver hats went out of style, and the silk hats came. And all of a sudden, and by this time we have mountain men, and Bridger, and all the guys out in the Rocky Mountains hunting the last of the beaver, because there's none left east here.
Right.
And they're hunting them to ship them off in packs of hundreds. And then silk hats come along, and all of a sudden there's no market for them at all. That's when they turn to the buffalo and start wiping the buffalo out for the robes. So, yeah, do read that. Another good whole series of books is Alan Eckert, and Frontiersman, goes right through from the very beginning here
What's
in
the last
Ohio.
name? A-C-K-Y?
E-C-K, Eckert, E-C-K-A-M-T. I think he just passed away here like a year or two ago. But he's got a whole series of books that are very good, like it is. But it goes right through the War of 1812, and onto the frontiers and out west. But it really has a lot of good Ohio history. Very, very good. I use it for some of my research.